My name is Rachel Dawson. I am 33 years old. And on a Thursday evening in November, I drove alone to the edge of Harlan County, Kentucky, to spend the night guarding an empty mansion that nobody else had been willing to stay in past midnight. I want to tell you what it feels like to have nothing to go back to, because that is where the story begins. My husband, Tom, had left in September. Not dramatically. There was no fight, no revelation, no moment I could point to and say that was when. He had simply, over the course of several weeks, removed himself from our life with the quiet efficiency of a man who had decided some time ago and was now executing the decision.
He took his things.
He took the dog. He left the house, which was in my name from before the marriage, and a note on the kitchen table that was 3 sentences long and which I read once and then put in the recycling bin. My friends had their own lives. My parents were in Ohio. I was in a house in Harlan that was mine, and that felt in his absence like the wrong size for one person, too much space in every room, too many silences shaped like the ones that used to be filled. I had my job at the county records office, which was part-time and not sufficient, financially or otherwise. I had started looking at job boards with the specific focus of someone who needs income and also, though she would not have admitted it at the time, distraction. The posting was unusual. It stood out not by what it offered, the pay was decent but not remarkable, but by what it asked for. One person. Overnight. Harlan County Historical Trust. Security and light maintenance position. Immediate start. The property was the Aldermore House, a 19th century estate on 12 acres at the edge of town that the Historical Trust had acquired 2 years earlier and was in the process of restoring for eventual use as a museum and event venue. The posting noted at the bottom, in language that I appreciated for its directness, candidates should be comfortable working alone in an isolated environment overnight. Previous applicants have found the position unsuitable for personal reasons. We are seeking someone with a particular tolerance for solitude. I applied that afternoon. I was called the following morning. I started Thursday. My friend said, "Don't go." The Aldermore House had a reputation in Harlan that was specific and long-standing, the kind of reputation that accumulates around old isolated properties in small towns, and that feeds on the reliable tendency of people to leave quickly and not explain why in terms that made sense. I went anyway, because I had nothing to go back to. And because somewhere underneath the practical reasons, I understood that what I needed was not safety or comfort, but something that would require me to be fully present in a way that ordinary grief-adjacent daily life was not providing. The mansion would require me to be fully present.
I was right about that.
I was right about almost nothing else. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's begin. The Aldermore House was built in 1887 by a coal magnate named William Aldermore who had made his fortune in the Harlan County mines and who had spent a portion of that fortune constructing a home that would announce the fortune to anyone passing within a quarter mile. It was 3 stories, 12 rooms, built of gray stone quarried locally, with a widow's walk at the top that looked out over the surrounding hills and a basement level that had originally housed the kitchen and servants' quarters. The Historical Trust had acquired it from the last Aldermore descendant, a woman in her 90s who had lived there alone for 30 years before her death and whose estate had left it to the trust with specific conditions about its preservation. 2 years into the restoration process, the structure was sound, but the interior was mid-restoration, stripped walls, exposed beams in some areas, new electrical partially installed, the old wiring in the process of being replaced in phases. I learned all of this from Gerald Whitmore, the Trust's facilities coordinator, who met me at the property Thursday at 7 o'clock in the evening for an orientation that lasted 45 minutes and covered the round schedule, the emergency contacts, the locations of the breaker panels, the quirks of the old heating system, and the specific areas that were cordoned off during restoration and not part of my patrol route. Gerald was a small, precise man in his 60s who communicated in organized lists and who had, I noticed, the particular quality of someone who was not going to discuss the Aldermore House's reputation because doing so was not on his list and therefore did not exist. He handed me a flashlight, a key ring with 7 keys, a laminated floor plan of all 3 stories, and a radio set to the county emergency channel. Previous security personnel found the night shift difficult for reasons we have not been able to fully document, he said, with the specific phrasing of someone who has had this conversation before and has arrived at this wording as the most accurate version available. If at any point you feel you cannot continue, you may call the number on this card and someone will come. There is no penalty for discontinuing. I took the card. What happened to the previous guards? I asked. They left, he said, during the night. One called in the morning from her car in the driveway. She had spent the night there and would not say why. But she was fine? I asked. Physically, yes, he said. She did not come back for her next shift. He left at 7:45. I locked the front door behind him. I stood in the entry hall of the Aldermore house with my flashlight and my laminated floor plan and the particular quality of silence that old stone buildings have at night. Not a thin silence, but a dense one. A silence that seems to come from inside the walls. I started my rounds. The round schedule Gerald had given me was straightforward. Every 2 hours, beginning at 9, I was to walk the full perimeter of all 3 floors, checking each room, confirming that windows were secured and nothing had been disturbed, logging my progress in the notebook he had left on the ground floor's front parlor table. Between rounds I could sit in the parlor, which had been left with a chair and a lamp and an outlet that worked, and read or rest. The first round at 9 was uneventful. The house was empty, 12 rooms plus the hallways plus the basement, which I checked with the flashlight because the electrical on the lower level was not yet operational. Empty. Still. The kind of still that accumulates in a building that has been unoccupied for a significant period, a particular held quality to the air. I logged the round and sat in the parlor and read. The second round, at 11, was also uneventful. I was beginning to understand, methodically, why previous guards might have had difficulty, not because of anything supernatural but because of the specific and relentless quality of aloneness in that building at night. It had weight to it. It pressed on you. I had said I needed to be fully present, and the house was delivering on that. Every creak of the old floorboards, every shudder of the heating system, every subtle shift of air through gaps in the restoration required full presence to categorize correctly as ordinary. I was good at it. I logged the 11 o'clock round and sat back down and kept reading. At midnight, I began the third round. Ground floor, clear. Second floor, clear. I reached the third floor landing and started down the hallway toward the rear rooms. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Above me. I was on the top floor. The floor plan Gerald had given me showed the widow's walk access, a hatch in the ceiling of the third floor landing, with a pull-down ladder, currently sealed with a padlock as part of the restoration restrictions. There was nothing above the third floor that a person could walk on. I stopped moving. I stood completely still in the third floor hallway with my flashlight and the laminated floor plan pressed against my chest, and I listened. The footsteps were not loud. They were deliberate. One, then another, moving across the ceiling above me from east to west, the direction of the widow's walk that ran along the roofline. And then the lights went out. Every one. The hallway lights that had been functioning as part of the new electrical installation, the stairwell lighting, the single working lamp I had left on in the parlor 2 floors below whose glow I had been using as a reference point. All of it simultaneously gone. I reached for my flashlight. It was already in my hand. I clicked it on. I pointed it down the hallway toward the far end. And what I saw standing there made my whole body go cold. A child. A small figure in the far end of the hallway, perhaps 20 feet from where I was standing. Standing very still. Looking directly at me. A girl, I thought, small-framed, perhaps 8 or 9 years old by height, wearing what appeared to be a dark coat. Her face in the flashlight beam was pale, and her eyes were open, and she was not moving. My mind ran through explanations at a speed that was not conscious. Intruder, vandal, homeless person, someone who had found a way in through one of the restoration access points.
A child.
A child in an empty mansion at midnight in November. Hey, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. I can see you. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. The figure didn't move. Can you tell me your name?
I said.
I started walking toward her slowly. She stepped back. 1 step. Then she turned and went through the door at the end of the hallway. The door to the east bedroom, which I had checked 20 minutes earlier and found empty. I crossed the hallway in 10 steps and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The window on the east wall was open. Not the broken latch open of an abandoned building, but open, swung wide, the cold November air coming through. I crossed to it and looked out. A fire escape, old, metal, clearly original to the building, ran down the exterior wall from this window to a small landing at the second floor level and then continued to the ground. I looked down. A figure was moving through the garden below, moving fast, already at the edge of the property where the old stone wall met the tree line. I radioed the county non-emergency line and reported what I had seen. Then I went downstairs, out the front door, and around the side of the building. The garden was empty. The wall where the figure had been heading had a gap in it. Old, weathered, an opening that the trust had apparently not yet gotten to in the restoration. I went back inside. I went to the breaker panel in the basement. Gerald had shown me its location and found the main breaker thrown. I reset it. The lights came back on. I went to the parlor and sat down. And I thought. I stayed the rest of the night. I did my 4 o'clock round and my 6 o'clock round, and I logged them both, and at 7:15 Gerald arrived to relieve me, and I told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat down in the second chair that had not been there the night before and that he had apparently brought from his car, and he looked at the floor for a moment. "The previous guard," he said slowly. "The one who spent the night in the car. She said she saw a child." I looked at him. "And the one before her," he said. "She called at 2 in the morning to say there was someone in the building. We sent someone out. No one was found." "Someone is using this building," I said. "Through that gap in the garden wall and the fire escape. Someone who knows the building well enough to know where the main breaker is." Gerald rubbed his forehead. "The Aldermore estate. The last descendant who lived here, she had a grandniece. A family situation that the trust knows about in general terms. There are individuals who believe they have a connection to this property that the legal transfer did not sever." I let that sit for a moment. "A child," I said, "with a key or knowledge of entry points and the ability to throw a main breaker." "Not a child," Gerald said quietly. I think it may be a young woman, mid-20s. She has been a concern for the trust in terms of the property boundary." I thought about the figure in the hallway, the deliberateness of the footsteps on the roof, the lights thrown at precisely the moment calculated to cause maximum fear, the retreat through the window with the speed and familiarity of someone who had done it many times. "She's been running people off," I said, deliberately. "Everyone who took this job." Gerald looked at me. "That is what I believe," he said. "She wants the building empty," I said. "Or she wants to keep coming in without being reported." "Or both," he said. I thought about the woman in her 90s who had lived here alone for 30 years, who had left this house to the historical trust with conditions about its preservation, who had, perhaps, had family who did not agree with that decision and who had never found a legal path to contesting it and had found, instead, another way. "I'll stay," I said, "tonight and the nights after. But I need a few things from you." Gerald looked at me with the expression of a man who has been dealing with this problem for 2 years and has just been handed, unexpectedly, a possible solution. "Name them," he said. I stayed at the Aldermore house for 6 weeks. The young woman's name was Sarah Aldermore. She was 26 years old, the great-grandniece of the last Aldermore descendant, and she had been accessing the property through the garden wall gap and the fire escape since the trust had taken possession 2 years earlier. She had, in that time, successfully frightened off 8 overnight security personnel through a combination of the footsteps on the widow's walk. She had found a way to prop the padlocked hatch that allowed partial access without triggering the lock, the deliberately thrown breakers, the appearance in the hallway, and the retreat through the window that she executed with the practiced speed of someone who had been doing it since childhood. She had grown up visiting this house. Her great-grandmother had brought her here. She had been, in her great-grandmother's declining years, the family member who came most often and who had, in those visits, formed an attachment to the house that was not legal but was real. The great-grandmother had left it to the trust rather than to family for reasons that Sarah, when we finally talked properly, with Gerald present, in the parlor with all the lights on and the windows shut against the November cold, was not entirely certain of. Possibly because she had not expected to live as long as she did, and the family relationships had deteriorated in the intervening years. Possibly because she had wanted to ensure the house survived rather than being sold. Possibly reasons Sarah would never know because the woman who could have told her was gone. Sarah was not malicious. I want to say that clearly because the 6 weeks of knowing her context made the distinction between malice and grief very clear to me. She was a young woman who had lost the thing she loved through the mechanism of a legal instrument she had no power to contest, and she had found the only leverage available to her, the house's reputation, the darkness, the fear, and she had used it to keep the building in a suspended state that felt, to her, like keeping the door open. I understood that. I understood it in a specific and personal way that had to do with September and Tom and a house in Harlan that was the wrong size for one person. We lose things. And sometimes we use everything available to us to keep the door from closing on what we have lost. Even when what we are keeping open is not really the thing we are trying to hold on to. Even when the house is not the person and the person is gone, and the house is just the place that still smells like them. I understood that very well. Gerald worked with the trust's board to establish a formal arrangement with Sarah, a volunteer position that gave her legitimate access to the property as part of the historical interpretation program they were developing. She knew the house better than anyone alive. That knowledge had value for the museum project. The arrangement was not perfect, and the legal situation was not changed by it. But Sarah had a key, a real one, and a reason to come through the front door. I took the permanent overnight position. The trust offered it when it became clear I was both capable of the work and disinclined to be frightened off by footsteps on a widow's walk. The pay was sufficient. The solitude was real, and I had discovered, in 6 weeks of it, that I was more capable of being alone than I had known. The Aldermore house at night is quieter now that I understand it. The heating system sounds are familiar. The particular creak of the third-floor hallway boards in cold weather is something I have catalogued and know. The gap in the garden wall has been repaired. The widow's walk hatch, Gerald left unlocked. He said it seemed right. Sarah sometimes comes up there in the evening before I start my rounds and stands at the roofline looking out at the hills. I can hear her footsteps above me. I know now that they are hers. The first night in that mansion did not just change me. It showed me something I could not unsee. Not the figure in the hallway. Not the darkness when the lights went out. What I could not unsee was this, that grief takes the shape available to it. That a young woman who had lost her family's house was using darkness and fear and rooftop footsteps the way I had been using overtime hours and a too big house and a job on the edge of town that nobody else would take. We were both, in our different ways, trying to stay inside something that had ended. I understood her completely. I still do. And this house, which nobody lasted more than one night in before me, is where I live now. Not in grief. Not in waiting. Just in the particular and quiet life that assembles itself when you stay long enough in a place that frightens you until it stops being frightening. And it stops. It always stops.
If you stay.